The fluorescent lights in the emergency room waiting area buzzed like angry insects. Owen Kavanaugh stood at the intake desk, his left forearm wrapped in a blood-soaked towel that had once been white. The fabric clung to the wound underneath, the edges darkened to rust. He kept his right hand pressed firmly over the towel, maintaining pressure with the practiced precision of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. The intake nurse barely looked up from her computer screen. "Name," she said flatly. "Owen Kavanaugh. Date of birth, April 7th, 1962. What brings you in tonight?" "Laceration to the left forearm," Owen said quietly. "Approximately 4 inches in length. Occurred 6 days ago. Now showing signs of infection. Erythema extending beyond the wound margins. Lymphatic streaking present. Mild fever onset approximately 18 hours ago." The nurse's fingers paused on the keyboard. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly as they took in his appearance. The worn flannel shirt with frayed cuffs. The work boots held together with duct tape along the sole seams. The weathered skin and hollow cheeks of a man who had been eating irregularly for a very long time. "Do you have insurance?" she asked. "No, ma'am." Her expression shifted to something colder. "The waiting room is full. It could be several hours." "I understand. I can wait." She gestured toward the crowded waiting area with one hand, already looking past him to the next person in line. Owen moved away from the desk, found a plastic chair against the far wall, and sat down carefully. His movements were economical, precise in a way that seemed out of place in his disheveled appearance. When he settled into the seat, his spine remained straight, his shoulders squared automatically. The minutes crawled past. Owen sat motionless, his eyes tracking the chaos of the emergency room with a focused attention that never wavered. Every 15 minutes exactly, without looking at a watch, he unwrapped the towel and examined the wound. His fingers moved over the inflamed skin with practiced efficiency, checking for heat, for the telltale signs of spreading cellulitis. Each time, he rewrapped the towel with the same careful pressure, the same precise technique. Around him, the waiting room filled and emptied in waves. A teenager with a broken wrist, a woman holding a feverish toddler, an elderly man clutching his chest. Owen watched them all called back through the double doors to the treatment area. His name never appeared on the board. 2 hours became 3. The fever made his vision swim slightly at the edges, but he remained upright, remained still. The only sign of his discomfort was the slight tremor in his hands when he checked the wound again. The infection was spreading. The red streaks, climbing his arm, had advanced another half-inch since his last check. At 3:17 in the morning, the double doors burst open. A man in a white coat strode through, his movements sharp with irritation. Dr. Vincent Harlow wore his authority like armor, his hospital ID badge swinging from a lanyard around his neck. Behind him, 2 nurses followed, their faces carefully neutral. Harlow's eyes swept the waiting room with undisguised contempt. They landed on Owen, on the blood-soaked towel, on the appearance of a man who had been sleeping rough for longer than anyone cared to count. "You," Harlow said loudly, his voice carrying across the entire waiting room. "With the arm. How long have you been out here?" "About 3 hours, sir," Owen replied quietly. Harlow crossed the space between them in 4 long strides. "And what exactly is the emergency that couldn't wait until morning to visit a clinic?" Owen unwrapped the towel carefully, exposing the wound. The laceration was clean-edged, but deep, the surrounding tissue angry and inflamed. "Infection," he said simply. "The wound is 6 days old. I've been cleaning it with soap and water, but I don't have access to antibiotics. The infection has spread to the lymphatic system. I need treatment before it becomes systemic." Harlow stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. The sound was harsh, performative, meant to be heard by everyone watching. "Oh, you need antibiotics," he said. "You need treatment. And let me guess, you'd also like some pain medication to go with that. Maybe something strong. Oxycodone, perhaps." Owen's expression remained calm, patient. "No, sir. Just antibiotics. Cephalexin would be appropriate for this type of infection." or doxycycline if there are concerns about resistance. Listen to this, Harlow said, turning to address the nurses and the other waiting patients. He's diagnosing himself now, prescribing his own medication. Tell me, where exactly did you get your medical degree? The public library. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the waiting room. Owen said nothing. His hands remained still on his knees, his breathing steady despite the flush of fever on his cheeks. Harlow leaned closer, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. This is an emergency room. We treat emergencies. Real emergencies. Heart attacks. Strokes. Trauma. We are not a shelter. We are not a pharmacy for people looking to game the system for drugs. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, sir, Owen said quietly. I understand. Good. Then I'm sure you also understand that we have actual patients who need actual care. People who aren't wasting our time with drug-seeking behavior. So I'm going to ask you very politely to leave. Now, Owen looked down at his arm, at the red streaks climbing toward his elbow, at the heat radiating from the infected tissue. Then he looked back at Harlow. Sir, with respect, I'm not looking for drugs. The infection is real. If it's not treated, it will progress to sepsis within 24 to 48 hours. Harlow straightened, his face flushing with anger. Security, he called out. We need security to the waiting room. What Dr. Vincent Harlow didn't know, what no one in that emergency room knew as they watched the homeless man gather his bloody towel and prepare to stand, was that in exactly 9 minutes, a nurse would pull a medical file that would change everything. Because the man sitting calmly before him, the man he was having removed from the hospital like discarded trash, had once performed 18 consecutive hours of combat trauma surgery in a crashed helicopter while under enemy fire. He had saved 47 lives that day, and the protocols he had developed in that blood-soaked metal coffin in Mogadishu were still being taught to every combat medic in the United States military. But for now, all anyone saw was an old man in a worn flannel shirt, standing slowly as 2 security guards approached across the waiting room floor. The smell of antiseptic hit Owen as the security guards approached, and suddenly he was somewhere else entirely. The antiseptic was different, stronger, mixed with blood and aviation fuel and the acrid burn of ammunition. October 3rd, 1993. Mogadishu, Somalia. The Super 6-1 crash site. He had been thrown clear when the Black Hawk went down, landing hard on sun-baked earth that knocked the wind from his lungs. His medical bag had stayed strapped to his chest. Around him, the world had dissolved into chaos. Gunfire from every direction, screaming. The twisted wreckage of the helicopter burning. And inside that wreckage, men who needed him. Sergeant Kavanaugh, a voice had shouted through the smoke. We got wounded. We got wounded bad. He had crawled back into the inferno. The metal was hot enough to blister skin. The smoke was thick enough to choke. But there were 17 men in that bird, and 14 of them were bleeding. He had set up his aid station in the cargo bay, using the bulkhead as a backboard, the torn seats as makeshift operating tables. 18 hours. That was how long he had worked without stopping, without resting, while the world outside tried to kill them all. The first man had been a kid from Oklahoma with a severed femoral artery. Owen had clamped it with forceps fashioned from a piece of the helicopter frame, sutured it closed with fishing line from his survival kit. The kid's name was Danny Reeves. He was 19 years old. He had lived. They had all lived. 47 casualties. 47 men who should have died in that metal coffin. Every single one had made it to the field hospital. Every single one had gone home. But Elizabeth hadn't. The memory shifted, lurched forward in time. The antiseptic smell was different again. Cleaner. Colder. The hospice facility where his wife had spent her final months. Owen sitting at her bedside, holding her hand, watching cancer consume her one cell at a time. All his training, all his knowledge, all the lives he had saved. None of it had mattered. None of it had been enough. She had died on a Tuesday morning in April. The sun had been shining. Birds had been singing outside the window. Elizabeth had squeezed his hand one last time and whispered, "You gave me 30 beautiful years. That's enough. Don't blame yourself." But he did. He blamed himself every single day. The security guards reached him, pulling Owen back to the present. The emergency room waiting area. The fluorescent lights. The disapproving stares of staff and patients who saw only what they wanted to see. "Sir," the first guard said, not unkindly, "we need you to come with us." Owen stood slowly, rewrapping the towel around his arm with the same careful precision. "Of course," he said quietly. "I apologize for the disruption." He followed them toward the exit, his gait steady despite the fever beginning to cloud his thoughts. Behind him, Dr. Harlow had already moved on, barking orders at nurses about patient flow and bed turnover. To Harlow, Owen had ceased to exist the moment security had been called. Just another problem solved, another system abuser removed. But as Owen walked past the intake desk, the nurse who had initially checked him and glanced up. Something in his bearing caught her attention. The way he held himself despite everything. The military straightness of his spine. The unconscious habit of scanning exits and threats even as he was being escorted out. She looked down at her computer screen, at the sparse information she had entered. Owen Kavanaugh. Date of birth April 7th, 1962. No insurance. No permanent address. But there was something else. A flag in the system. A note attached to his name from a previous visit, years ago. See military service records, the note read. Contact VA liaison if patient presents. The nurse frowned, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then she minimized her current screen and opened the hospital's medical records database. She typed in Owen's name and date of birth, hit search, and waited. The file that loaded was extensive. Page after page of service records. Unit assignments. Deployment history. And then the commendations. Silver Star. Bronze Star with Valor. Another Bronze Star. Soldier's Medal. Combat Medical Badge. Expert Field Medical Badge. Purple Heart. The list went on. The nurse's eyes widened. She scrolled further, found the detailed service summary. Sergeant First Class Owen Kavanaugh, 18D Special Forces Medical Sergeant. Served with 5th Special Forces Group, 75th Ranger Regiment Medical Detachment, and Task Force Ranger. Notable actions included 18 hours of continuous trauma care during the Battle of Mogadishu, credited with saving 47 lives through innovative field procedures that were subsequently adopted into standard combat medical protocols. She looked up. Owen was almost to the exit, the security guards flanking him. Dr. Harlow was 30 feet away, still holding court with his nurses. The nurse picked up the phone and dialed a 3-digit extension. She needed to reach someone. Anyone, before this man walked out the door and disappeared into the night with an infection that could kill him. Owen stepped through the automatic doors into the pre-dawn darkness. The air outside was cold, sharp against his feverish skin. He paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the hospital. Through the glass, he could see the chaos of the emergency room continuing without him. Patients being called, staff rushing between rooms. Life-saving and life-ending in equal measure, all of it happening whether he was there or not. He had given up his right to be part of that world 3 years ago. When Elizabeth died, when he realized that all his skill, all his knowledge, all his decorated service meant nothing if he couldn't save the one person who mattered most. He had walked away from the house they had shared, from the life they had built, from everything that reminded him of his failure. He had let himself become invisible because invisible men couldn't fail anyone else. Owen turned away from the hospital and started walking. His arm throbbed with each heartbeat. The fever made his vision swim at the edges. He knew the infection was spreading, knew that without antibiotics, he had perhaps 2 days before sepsis would set in, 2 days before his body would begin shutting down, system by system, the way Elizabeth's had. Maybe that would be easier. Maybe that would be the end he deserved. He walked 3 blocks before he had to stop, leaning against a brick wall to catch his breath. The morning shift would be starting soon at the cemetery. Elizabeth's grave was 2 miles away. He visited every day at dawn, the same ritual he had maintained for 3 years. He would sit on the bench near her headstone and tell her about the night, about the people he had seen, about the ones who reminded him of patients from before. Still here, Lizzie, he would say. Still trying. Except tonight, he wasn't sure he could make the walk. The fever was getting worse. His legs felt unsteady beneath him. The infection had moved faster than he had anticipated. Perhaps he had waited too long to seek help. Perhaps some part of him had wanted to wait too long. Owen pushed himself away from the wall and took another step forward. Then another. He would make it to Elizabeth's grave. He would keep his promise. He had survived Mogadishu. He had survived losing her. He would survive this too, or he wouldn't. Either way, he would do it with dignity. He would do it still trying. Behind him, in the emergency room he had just left, phones were beginning to ring. Files were being pulled. A young resident named Dr. Sarachan was reading through service records with growing disbelief. And a retired Army surgeon who volunteered on Wednesday mornings was arriving early for his shift, about to hear a name he had never expected to hear again. But Owen knew none of this. He simply walked forward into the darkness, one step at a time, his infected arm cradled against his chest, heading toward a grave where he could sit and talk to the only person who had ever really understood. Dr. Sarachan had been on shift for 11 hours when she noticed the commotion at the intake desk. She was 28 years old, 2 years out of residency, and still young enough to believe that medicine was about helping people rather than managing liability and bed turnover rates. That idealism made her unpopular with Dr. Harlow, who viewed the emergency room as a battlefield where efficiency mattered more than compassion. She watched from across the room as security escorted the homeless man toward the exit. There was something about the way he moved that caught her attention. Despite the obvious fever flush on his cheeks, despite the blood-soaked towel wrapped around his arm, he walked with a precision that seemed almost military. His spine remained straight. His eyes scanned the room with focused awareness even as he was being removed. Chun turned back to her current patient, an elderly woman with chest pain who needed admission. But her mind kept drifting back to the man Harlow had dismissed. Something about the interaction bothered her. The way the man had diagnosed his own condition. The medical terminology he had used. Erythema, lymphatic streaking, systemic infection. Those weren't phrases picked up from the internet. Those are terms used by people with medical training. She finished with her patient and walked to the intake desk. The nurse there, Patricia Morales, was still staring at her computer screen, her face pale. "Everything okay?" Chun asked. "That man who just left," Morales said quietly. "The one Dr. Harlow had security remove. Did you see him?" "Briefly." "Why?" Morales turned her monitor so Chun could see. "Look at this file." Chun leaned closer, reading through the service records. Her eyes widened with each line. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Combat Medical Badge, the Battle of Mogadishu, 47 lives saved, innovative trauma protocols still in use today. "Oh my God," Chun whispered. "I flagged it to Dr. Harlow's assistant," Morales said. "But he's in with a critical patient. By the time he gets the message, that man will be gone." Chun straightened, her jaw setting with determination. "Which way did he go?" "Out the main entrance. Maybe 5 minutes ago." Chun didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat from the staff room and pushed through the emergency room doors into the pre-dawn cold. The parking lot was mostly empty, the street lights casting long shadows across the pavement. She scanned the sidewalk in both directions, looking for any sign of the man. There, 3 blocks down, moving slowly. She could see him leaning against a building, clearly struggling. Chun broke into a run. Owen heard footsteps approaching and turned, his hand instinctively moving to a defensive position before he caught himself. Old habits. Dangerous habits for a man who no longer had the right to defend anything. The young doctor from the emergency room stopped a few feet away, breathing hard from her sprint. "Sir," she said, "please wait." "I'm leaving, ma'am," Owen replied quietly, just like the doctor ordered. "I know, but I need to talk to you. My name is Dr. Sarachan. I saw your medical records." Owen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A wariness that hadn't been there before. "Those records are old," he said. "They show extensive combat medical experience," Chun continued. "Special Forces. Task Force Ranger. Mogadishu. Is that accurate? It was a long time ago. The protocols you developed are still being taught. Did you know that? I studied them in my trauma rotation. The rapid hemorrhage control technique. The field pneumothorax decompression method. Those are yours. Owen looked away, down the empty street. They were necessary. Men were dying. Chun took a step closer. That infection in your arm is serious. You were right about the lymphatic involvement. You were right about the timeline for sepsis. If you don't get treatment in the next 12 to 24 hours, you could die. I understand the risks, ma'am. Then you understand that what Dr. Harlow did was wrong. You came to a hospital seeking treatment for a legitimate medical emergency, and you were turned away because of how you look. That's not medicine. That's prejudice. Owen met her eyes then, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of what he carried. The grief, the guilt, the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had been fighting battles for so long he didn't know how to stop. Dr. Harlow was doing his job, Owen said quietly. The emergency room is full. There are people with heart attacks, strokes, real emergencies. I'm just a man with an infected cut who made poor decisions. You're a decorated combat medic with a life-threatening infection, Chun countered. That makes you exactly the kind of patient we're supposed to treat. Please, come back inside. Let me help you. Owen shook his head slowly. I appreciate your concern, doctor, but I've taken up enough of your time. There are patients who actually need you. He started to turn away, but the movement made him sway slightly. The fever was worsening. Chun could see it in the glassy quality of his eyes, the tremor in his hands. When did you last eat? She asked. Yesterday. Maybe the day before. When did you last sleep? Owen didn't answer. The truth was he couldn't remember. Sleep had become something he did in 2-hour increments. Always alert, always ready to move. Survival skills from deployments that had never quite left him. Chun made a decision. She pulled out her phone and dialed the emergency room. This is Dr. Chun, she said when someone answered. I need a wheelchair brought to the corner of 5th and Madison. Immediately. And page Dr. Webb if he's arrived for his shift. Tell him I have a patient he's going to want to see. She ended the call and looked at Owen. Dr. Marcus Webb volunteers here on Wednesday mornings. He's retired Army. Served as a surgeon at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Do you know it? Owen nodded slowly. Germany. Main trauma center for casualties coming out of the Middle East and Africa. Dr. Webb was there in the 90s. He told me once about a combat medic who came through with casualties from Mogadishu. Said the medic had kept 17 men alive who should have died. Said the techniques he used revolutionized field trauma care. He called that medic the finest combat medic he'd ever seen. Owen's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened, but he blinked the emotion away. Danny Reeves, he said quietly. Oklahoma, 19 years old. Severed femoral artery. I used forceps made from helicopter frame to clamp it. Chun felt her throat constrict. You remember their names. All of them. Every single one. A wheelchair appeared around the corner, pushed by an orderly Chun had called. She gestured to it. Please, she said, let me treat you. Not because of what you did in Mogadishu. Not because of the medals or the protocols. But because you're a human being who needs help. And I'm a doctor who took an oath. Owen looked at the wheelchair, then at Chun, then back toward the hospital. Inside those walls, Dr. Harlow continued to shift, utterly unaware that the man he had dismissed as a drug-seeking homeless veteran was someone whose innovations he relied on every time a trauma patient came through the doors. Unaware that in a few minutes, everything he thought he knew was about to be challenged. Owen's legs were shaking now. The infection was winning. He could feel it spreading through his system, could feel his body beginning the slow cascade toward shutdown. He had survived so much. Mogadishu, Elizabeth's death, 3 years on the streets. But this infection, this stupid, preventable infection, might be what finally ended him. Unless he accepted help. Unless he let someone care whether he lived or died. All right, he said quietly, his voice barely audible. All right. The wheelchair felt wrong. Owen sat rigidly upright, his hands gripping the armrests, every muscle in his body resisting the act of being helped. He had spent 3 years avoiding this exact situation. 3 years making sure no one got close enough to care. 3 years believing he didn't deserve the kindness that Dr. Chun was now offering. The orderly pushed him back through the emergency room entrance. Patients in the waiting area stared. Some recognized him as the man who had just been removed. Their expressions ranged from confusion to curiosity to the same contempt that Dr. Harlow had shown. Owen kept his eyes forward, his jaw set, his breathing controlled despite the fever making his skin burn. Dr. Chen led them to a treatment bay in the back corner of the emergency room, away from the main flow of traffic. She pulled a curtain around them, creating a small island of privacy in the chaos. "Help me get him on the bed," she said to the orderly. Owen stood on his own, waving off their assistance. "I can manage, ma'am." He sat on the edge of the examination table, and the orderly left. Chen began pulling supplies from cabinets. For equipment, antibiotic vials, sterile dressing materials. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but Owen could see the slight tremor in her hands. She was nervous. Not of him, he realized. Of what was about to happen when the rest of the staff discovered who he was. "You don't have to do this," Owen said quietly. "Yes," Chen replied without turning around. "I do." She approached within 4 kit, but Owen held up his right hand. "May I?" he asked. Chen hesitated, then handed him the equipment. Owen found a vein in his left arm with practiced ease, inserted the catheter on the first attempt, and secured it with tape. He looked up to find Chen staring at him. "Old habits," he said. She nodded slowly and connected the 4-line, starting a saline drip. Then she carefully unwrapped the bloody towel from his forearm. The wound underneath was worse than she had expected. The laceration itself was clean, the edges approximated well, but the surrounding tissue was inflamed and hot to the touch. Red streaks extended from the wound site toward his elbow, clear markers of lymphangitis. She could see why he had been concerned. Without treatment, this infection would absolutely progress to sepsis. "This needs to be cleaned and debrided," Chen said. "And you need broad-spectrum antibiotics." "When was your last tetanus shot?" "Deployed to Afghanistan in 2009, Owen replied. "Required vaccination update before deployment." "That's 15 years ago. You'll need a booster. And I want to culture this wound before we start antibiotics. We need to know what we're dealing with." As she worked, Owen's mind drifted again. The smell of antiseptic, the clinical efficiency of medical care. It pulled him back to a different hospital room, a different kind of emergency. Elizabeth in the hospice bed, her skin pale as paper, her breathing shallow and labored. The cancer had been aggressive, pancreatic adenocarcinoma, stage 4 by the time they caught it. Owen had known the statistics. 6% 5-year survival rate. Median survival time of 6 months. But he had fought anyway. Research trials, experimental treatments. He had called in every favor from every medical contact he had made over 3 decades of service. Nothing had worked. The cancer had spread too fast, consumed too much. Elizabeth had grown weaker day by day, and Owen had sat beside her bed feeling more helpless than he had ever felt in any combat zone. In Mogadishu, he had tools, training, protocols. He could clamp arteries, pack wounds, stabilize trauma. But against cancer, against the cellular betrayal happening inside his wife's body, he had nothing. She had tried to comfort him in those final weeks. "Owen," she had said, her voice barely a whisper, "you can't save everyone. You can't fix everything. I should be able to save you," he had replied, gripping her hand. "I should be able to do something. You already did. You gave me 30 years of the best life I could have imagined. You gave me love. You gave me purpose. That's enough. That has to be enough." But it hadn't been enough for Owen. When she died, when he felt her hand go slack in his, when he heard the monitor flatline with that terrible, endless tone, something inside him had shattered. He had saved 47 men in Mogadishu. He had treated hundreds of wounded soldiers across multiple deployments. He had developed techniques that saved thousands more. But he couldn't save Elizabeth. What good was any of it? What good were the medals, the commendations, the grateful letters from soldiers he had patched up and sent home to their families? Elizabeth was dead, and Owen was still here, still breathing, still taking up space in a world that had no more use for him. He had walked out of the hospice that day and kept walking. Left the house they had shared. Left his job at the VA hospital where he had been teaching younger medics. Left everything that reminded him of his failure. He told himself it was temporary, that he just needed time to process. to grieve. But days became weeks, became months, became years. He found himself sleeping under bridges, in shelters, in the doorways of closed businesses. He stopped looking for work, stopped answering when people asked if he needed help. He became invisible because invisible men couldn't disappoint anyone, couldn't fail anyone, couldn't watch anyone else die while they stood by helpless. Mr. Kavanaugh, Chin's voice cut through the memory. Can you hear me? Owen blinked, pulled himself back to the present. Yes, ma'am. Sorry. Your heart rate spiked. Are you in pain? No. Just remembering. Chun studied his face for a long moment. Your wife, she said quietly. That's why you left, isn't it? Owen's throat tightened. He nodded once, not trusting his voice. What was her name? Elizabeth. Elizabeth Marie Kavanaugh. Chin finished cleaning the wound and began applying sterile dressing. I lost my father 2 years ago, she said. Heart attack. He was healthy, active, only 61. I was working in the ER when they brought him in. I did everything right, followed every protocol. But sometimes everything right isn't enough. Owen looked at her. You stayed, he said. It took me 6 months to come back to work. 6 months of wondering if I should have seen signs I missed. If I should have made him go to a cardiologist sooner. If I failed him. But then I realized something. Staying away didn't honor his memory. Helping others did. Owen said nothing. He understood the logic. He had told himself similar things 1,000 times. But logic and emotion were different countries, and he had been living in the wasteland between them for 3 years. The curtain suddenly pulled back. A man in his late 60s stood there, wearing hospital volunteer scrubs. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent significant time in uniform. His eyes went immediately to Owen, and for a long moment, he simply stared. Dr. Marcus Webb, Chin said, thank you for coming. But Webb wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Owen's exposed forearm, at the faded tattoo partially visible beneath the medical tape and foreline. A rod of Asclepius with coordinates wrapped around the serpent and staff. Numbers that Webb recognized immediately. 33.3407 north, 44.3939 east. Lifeline, Webb said, his voice barely audible. His hand came up slowly, trembling, moving toward a salute before he caught himself. Sir, is it really you? Owen stared at the older man, standing at the curtain's edge, his mind struggling to place the face. 30 years of deployments. Hundreds of soldiers treated. Thousands of faces blurred together in memory. But something about the way Webb stood, the precise military bearing, triggered recognition. Landstuhl, Owen said quietly. You were a resident. Trauma surgery. Webb nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. October 1993. You came through with the Mogadishu casualties. I assisted on 3 of your patients. Severe hemorrhagic shock. Multiple penetrating trauma. You had kept them stable for 18 hours using equipment you improvised from a crashed helicopter. That was a long time ago, Owen replied, his voice carefully neutral. I've never forgotten it, Webb said. He stepped into the treatment bay, and Chin pulled the curtain closed behind him. The techniques you used that day, the way you had managed those injuries with almost nothing, it changed how I thought about trauma care, changed how I practiced for the next 30 years. Owen looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. I did what was necessary. Anyone would have done the same. No, Webb said firmly. Anyone wouldn't have. Most medics would have triaged, would have focused on the salvageable cases and let the critical ones go. You refused to let anyone die. You fought for every single one of them. Because they were brothers, Owen said. Because that's the job. Dr. Webb, Chin interjected carefully. Mr. Kavanaugh was brought back in for treatment of a serious infection. But before I found him outside, he had been removed from the emergency room by security. Dr. Harlow ordered him out. Webb's expression hardened. Vincent did what? He assumed Mr. Kavanaugh was drug-seeking. Didn't examine the wound. Didn't check vitals. Just had security escort him out. Webb turned to look at Owen's arm, at the angry red streaks climbing toward his elbow, at the evidence of cellulitis that any first-year medical student should have recognized. His jaw clenched. Where's Vincent now? With a critical patient, Chin said. Trauma Bay 2. Good. That gives us time. Webb moved closer to Owen, his demeanor shifting from emotional to clinical. Sergeant Kavanaugh, with your permission, I'd like to examine that wound. Owen nodded. Webb's hands moved with practiced efficiency, palpating the tissue around the infection, checking for crepitus, assessing the depth of involvement. His touch was gentle but thorough. When he finished, he stepped back and met Owen's eyes. You were right to come in. This needs aggressive treatment. How long have you been dealing with this? 6 days since the injury. Infection signs started appearing 3 days ago, and you waited until tonight to seek treatment because... Owen hesitated. Because I know how emergency rooms work. Limited resources. Real emergencies take priority. A homeless man with an infected cut doesn't rate. Webb's expression softened. You're not just a homeless man with an infected cut, Sergeant. You're a decorated combat medic with a life-threatening infection. That absolutely rates. I'm not a sergeant anymore, Owen said quietly. Haven't been for a long time. The rank is retired, Webb replied. Not erased. I'm going to start you on vancomycin and piperacillin-azobactam. Broad coverage until we get culture results. And I want a mission for at least 48 hours of 4 antibiotics. That's not necessary, Owen began. It absolutely is necessary, Webb interrupted. You're showing early signs of sepsis, tachycardia, fever. If we send you back out on the street with oral antibiotics, and this progresses, you'll be back in 3 days in intensive care. Or you won't be back at all. Owen opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. The logic was sound. He knew it was sound. If one of his soldiers had presented with these symptoms, he would have insisted on exactly the same treatment protocol. But accepting help for himself felt different. Felt like admitting he was worth saving. The curtain pulled back again, and a woman in her mid-40s entered. She wore navy blue scrubs with a VA liaison badge clipped to her pocket. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her eyes went immediately to Owen with an intensity that made him stiffen. Owen Kavanaugh, she said, and it wasn't a question. Her voice carried a mix of relief and frustration. Do you have any idea how long I've been looking for you? Owen's hands gripped the edge of the examination table. I don't know you, he said. Rosa Martinez. Bautrak program. Your wife contacted me 6 months before she died. She made me promise to find you if anything happened to her. She said you'd blame yourself. She said you'd run. She was right. The words hit Owen like physical blows. Elizabeth had known. Of course she had known. She had understood him better than anyone. Had seen through 30 years of compartmentalization and emotional armor to the terrified boy underneath who was convinced he couldn't save the people who mattered most. Elizabeth asked you to find me, Owen repeated slowly. She gave me a list of places you might go, people you might contact. She told me about your habits, your routines, the cemetery where your parents are buried. I've been checking there every week for 3 years. This morning was the first time you didn't show up. Because I was here, Owen said. Because the infection. Rosa moved closer, her expression gentling. She also gave me a letter. Said to give it to you when I found you. I've been carrying it for 3 years. She reached in her pocket and pulled out an envelope, worn soft from being handled, from being carried and reread. Owen's name was written on the front in Elizabeth's careful script. His hand trembled as he took it. I can't, he whispered. I can't read this. You don't have to read it now, Rosa said. But she wanted you to have it. And she wanted you to know that what happened to her wasn't your fault. That you gave her everything she needed. That she loved you enough to make sure you'd be taken care of even after she was gone. Owen stared at the envelope, his vision blurring. 30 years of marriage. 3 years of grief. And Elizabeth had still been thinking of him, still trying to save him, even as cancer consumed her from within. Webb stepped forward, placed a hand on Owen's shoulder. The admission I mentioned, it's not just for the infection. The VA has a reintegration program. Medical care, counseling, housing assistance. Rosa runs it. If you're willing. I don't deserve, Owen started. That's not your decision to make. Rosa interrupted firmly. Elizabeth made me promise. I keep my promises. You're coming with me when you're medically cleared. You're getting help. And you're going to honor your wife's memory by letting yourself heal. Owen looked up at her, then at Webb, then at Shun standing quietly by the curtain. 3 people who had no reason to care about a homeless veteran who had given up on himself. 3 people who were offering him something he hadn't believed still existed. Hope. Before he could respond, the curtain yanked open violently. Dr. Vincent Harlow stood there, his face flushed with anger. His eyes swept the treatment bay, landing on Owen with immediate recognition. "What the hell is going on here?" Harlow demanded. "I gave explicit orders for this man to be removed from the premises. Who authorized bringing him back in? Who is wasting hospital resources on?" He stopped mid-sentence. Webb had turned to face him, and something in the older surgeon's expression made Harlow pause. "Vincent," Webb said quietly, dangerously, "I strongly suggest you stop talking. Right now, before you make this situation significantly worse than it already is." Harlow's eyes narrowed at Webb's tone. "I don't know what kind of authority you think you have here, Marcus, but I run this emergency room. I make the decisions about who gets treated and who doesn't. And I made my decision about this man 2 hours ago." "Then you made the wrong decision," Webb replied, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge that made several nurses passing by slow their steps. "This patient has a serious infection requiring immediate intervention. Dr. Chun made the correct medical judgment in bringing him back for treatment." Harlow turned his attention to Chun, and she felt the full weight of his contempt. "You went against a direct order from the head of this department. You chased down a patient I had removed and brought him back without authorization. Do you understand how serious that is?" "I understand that a man was about to die from an untreated infection," Chin said, keeping her voice steady despite the anxiety coursing through her. "I took an oath. That oath doesn't have exceptions for people who can't pay or don't have a permanent address." "Spare me the idealistic speech," Harlow snapped. "This emergency room treats 200 patients a day. We have limited beds, limited staff, limited resources. I have to make difficult decisions about priority of care. And I will not have my authority undermined by a second-year attending who thinks she knows better." Owen watched the confrontation unfold, tension building in his chest. This was exactly what he had wanted to avoid. People putting themselves at risk for him. Dr. Chun jeopardizing her career. Dr. Webb confronting his colleague. Rosa standing there with a letter from Elizabeth that Owen was terrified to read. All of it because he had been stupid enough to let an infection get out of control. "Stop," Owen said quietly. No one seemed to hear him. Harlow was still berating Chun, his voice rising with each sentence. Webb had moved to stand beside her, creating a united front. Rosa had her phone out, presumably calling someone at the VA. "Stop," Owen repeated, louder this time. The argument paused. Everyone turned to look at him. "This isn't worth it," Owen continued. "Dr. Harlow is right. The emergency room has limited resources. There are people with heart attacks, strokes, actual emergencies. I'm taking up space that someone else needs. I'll go. Dr. Chun can give me a prescription for oral antibiotics, and I'll manage the rest on my own." "Absolutely not," Webb said immediately. "Owen, you need 4 antibiotics. You need admission. This infection will kill you if it's not treated aggressively." "People die every day," Owen replied, his voice hollow. "One more won't matter." "It matters to me," Chin said fiercely. "It matters to Dr. Webb. It matters to Rosa. And it should matter to you." Harlow laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Oh, this is rich. You're all acting like this man is some kind of hero. Like he's special. He's homeless. He's probably been on the streets by choice. Probably has substance abuse issues, mental health problems. And now you want me to admit him, tie up a bed for days, waste thousands of dollars in resources on someone who'll be right back out there the moment we discharge him." Owen felt something shift inside him. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because part of him believed them. Part of him had spent 3 years thinking exactly those thoughts. That he deserved the streets. That he deserved the suffering. That his failures with Elizabeth had earned him every cold night, every hungry day, every moment of isolation. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant for 3 years, was beginning to wake up. That part remembered the boy from Oklahoma whose name was Danny Reeves. Remembered holding pressure on a severed femoral artery for 40 minutes while enemy fire pinged off the helicopter frame above his head. Remembered Elizabeth's smile on their wedding day. Remembered the promise he had made to himself when he first put on the uniform. To serve, to protect, to save lives. Even when it was hard. Even when it hurt. Even when it seemed impossible. Dr. Harlow, Owen said, his voice quiet but carrying a new quality. A firmness that made everyone in the treatment bay turn a look at him. You're right that I'm homeless. You're right that I have mental health issues. PTSD, survivor's guilt, complicated grief, depression. I could probably give you a dozen diagnoses if you wanted them. But you're wrong about one thing. Harlow crossed his arms. And what's that? I'm not here by choice. I'm here because my wife died 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer, and I couldn't save her. I'm a medic. I saved 47 men in Mogadishu. I developed protocols that are still being taught to combat medics today. But I couldn't save Elizabeth. So I walked away from everything because I believed I didn't deserve to be saved either. But I was wrong. He looked at Chun, at Webb, at Rosa standing there with Elizabeth's letter. I was wrong because people like Dr. Chun exist. People who run after patients in the cold because they believe every life matters. People like Dr. Webb who remember names and faces from 30 years ago. People like Rosa who spend 3 years searching for a man they've never met because they made a promise to a dying woman. Owen turned his attention back to Harlow. So yes, admit me. Tie up your bed. Spend your resources. Because maybe, just maybe, I'm worth it. Not because of what I did in Mogadishu. Not because of medals or commendations. But because I'm a human being who deserves a chance to heal. Just like every other patient who walks through these doors. The treatment bay went silent. Harlow's face had gone pale, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You think, Harlow started, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. You think you can come in here and lecture me about medical ethics? About resource allocation? About who deserves treatment? I have run this emergency room for 12 years. I have made life and death decisions that kept this hospital functioning. And I will not be undermined by some homeless man with a sob story about. Dr. Harlow, a new voice cut through the tension. The hospital administrator stood at the curtain's edge, her expression glacial. A word. In my office. Now. Harlow turned. Sandra. I'm in the middle of. Now, she repeated. Her eyes flicked to Owen, to the 4 in his arm, to the visible infection on his forearm. And when we're done talking, you're going to come back here and apologize to this patient. And to Dr. Chun. And to anyone else you've humiliated tonight. Harlow's jaw clenched so hard Owen could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. He spun on his heel and stalked out of the treatment bay, the administrator following behind him. The curtain swung closed in his wake, leaving sudden silence. Webb let out a long breath. Owen, that was stupid. Owen finished. I just made an enemy of the head of emergency medicine. No, Webb said. That was courage. That was standing up for yourself. That was the first step toward healing. Rosa moved closer, holding out the envelope again. Elizabeth would be proud of you, she said softly. She always said you were the bravest man she knew, even when you couldn't see it yourself. Owen took the letter, his hands still shaking. He ran his thumb over Elizabeth's handwriting, feeling the ghost of her presence in every loop and curve. For 3 years, he had run from her memory. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to read her words. To hear what she wanted to tell him. Not yet, he whispered. But soon. I promise. Chun stepped forward and began adjusting his 4, adding the antibiotics Webb had ordered. The familiar rhythm of medical care surrounded him. Monitors beeping. Fluid dripping. The controlled chaos of an emergency room doing what it did best. Saving lives. Even lives that had given up on themselves. The antibiotics flowing through Owen's veins brought a strange clarity. Not physical relief, not yet. The infection would take days to respond to treatment. But mental clarity. The fog of fever lifting just enough to let him think clearly for the first time in hours. Maybe for the first time in years. Chun had stepped out to handle other patients, leaving Owen alone with Webb and Rosa. The older surgeon pulled up a stool and sat down. His movements careful, deliberate. He studied Owen's face with the practiced eye of someone who had seen thousands of wounded soldiers. "How long have you been on the streets?" Webb asked. 3 years, give or take. "And in those 3 years, how many times have you sought medical care?" Owen hesitated. "Twice. Once for pneumonia 2 winters ago. Once for a laceration that needed sutures last year. But not for regular care. Not for preventive treatment." Owen shook his head. The VA had programs. He knew they did. Rosa's presence here proved that Elizabeth had known about them too. But walking into a VA hospital meant seeing other veterans. Meant questions about where he had been, what he had been doing. Meant confronting the reality that he had abandoned everything, including the brothers who might have needed his help. Easier to stay invisible. Easier to pretend he had simply ceased to exist. Rosa cleared her throat. "Elizabeth told me you'd do this. She said you'd punish yourself. That you'd find a way to make her death your fault, even though it wasn't." Owen looked down at the letter still clutched in his hand. "What else did she tell you?" "That you were the kindest man she'd ever known. That you spent 30 years saving lives and then couldn't forgive yourself for the one life you couldn't save. That you needed help but would never ask for it. So she asked for you." Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. "She made me promise 3 things. First, to find you. Second, to make sure you got medical care and housing. Third, to tell you that loving you was the greatest privilege of her life, and watching you destroy yourself over her death would break her heart all over again." Owen's hands began to shake. The letter felt heavy, impossibly heavy. He wanted to open it, wanted to hear Elizabeth's voice again, even just in written words. But he was terrified of what she might say, terrified that she would be disappointed in what he had become, in the 3 years he had wasted, in the man who had given up. "You don't have to read it now," Webb said quietly, "but you do have to make a choice. You can keep running, keep punishing yourself, keep believing you don't deserve help or healing or a future, or you can accept what's being offered: medical care, housing, a chance to put your life back together. And if I can't," Owen whispered, "if I try and fail." "Then you fail," Rosa said. "But at least you tried. At least you honored Elizabeth's faith in you by giving yourself a chance." The curtain opened again, and Chun returned. Behind her, a nurse pushed a gurney. "We have a bed ready for you upstairs," Chun said. "Medical ward, room 412. 2-day admission minimum for 4 antibiotics and monitoring." Owen looked at the gurney, at the clean white sheets, at the promise of rest and care and safety. For 3 years, he had slept on concrete and cardboard, had woken every 2 hours, alert for threats, had lived in a constant state of hypervigilance that left him exhausted down to his bones. The idea of sleeping in a real bed in a locked room with medical staff monitoring him felt simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. Wonderful because his body ached for rest. Terrifying because rest meant lowering his guard, meant trusting that he would wake up, meant believing he deserved to wake up. "What happens after 2 days?" Owen asked. "After you're medically stable," Rosa answered, "I take you to the reintegration facility. It's not a shelter. It's a program. Private rooms, medical support, counseling, job training if you want it. No time limit. You stay as long as you need to get back on your feet." Owen closed his eyes. He could walk away right now, pull out the 4, thank them for their time, disappear back into the streets where he belonged, where he was safe, where his failures couldn't hurt anyone else. But Elizabeth's letter was still in his hand, and somewhere in his chest, underneath the scar tissue of 3 years of grief, something small and fragile was beginning to stir, something that might have been hope. He opened his eyes and looked at Webb. "In Mogadishu," Owen said slowly when the helicopters went down and everything went to hell, "there was a moment when I thought about running, about getting clear of the crash site, finding somewhere to hide until extraction came. Would have been the smart tactical decision. But you didn't run," Webb said. "No, because there were wounded men in that helicopter, brothers who needed me. So I went back into the fire." Webb nodded, understanding crossing his face. "And now you're wounded, and we're your brothers, and we're not leaving you behind." Owen felt something crack inside him. Not break, crack, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Tears stung his eyes, and he didn't fight them, didn't hide them. Just let them fall, because hiding had taken more strength than he had left. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'll stay. Rose's smile was radiant. Chin's eyes glistened as she moved to help transfer Owen to the gurney. Webb stood and placed a hand on Owen's shoulder, a gesture of respect and solidarity that transcended rank or circumstance. As they wheeled Owen out of the treatment bay, he caught a glimpse of Harlow standing near the nurse's station. The administrator was beside him, her expression stern. Harlow's face was ashen, his posture defensive. He looked up as Owen passed, and for a moment, their eyes met. Owen saw something shift in Harlow's expression. Not quite remorse, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of recognition. That the man he had dismissed as worthless, as a system abuser, as someone undeserving of care, was a human being with a story, with losses, with a lifetime of service that Harlow couldn't begin to comprehend. The gurney rolled past, and the moment broke. Owen looked away, focusing instead on the ceiling tiles passing overhead. Standard hospital ceiling, water-stained in places, fluorescent lights creating a rhythm of bright and shadow. He had seen ceilings like this in field hospitals, in Landstuhl, in the hospice where Elizabeth died. But this ceiling was different. This ceiling led to a room where he would sleep, where he would heal, where he would, maybe, begin to believe that survival wasn't a betrayal of the dead. That living was its own form of courage. The elevator doors closed around them. Webb had followed, staying close. Rosa, too. Chin had returned to the emergency room, but Owen knew he would see her again. She wasn't the type to start something and not see it through. The letter crinkled slightly in his hand as they ascended. He looked down at it, at Elizabeth's handwriting, at the promise of her words, at the love that had survived even death. Not yet, he thought, but soon, when he was stronger, when he was ready to hear what she needed to say. The elevator opened on the 4th floor. The medical ward was quiet, peaceful. A nurse greeted them with a smile, not a shred of judgment in her eyes. Just professional care, just kindness. Room 412 was small but clean. A single bed, a window overlooking the city, a chair where someone could sit if they wanted to keep him company. Owen transferred from the gurney to the bed, his body sinking into the mattress with a relief so profound it brought fresh tears. "I'll check on you in the morning," Webb said. "We'll talk about next steps then. I'll be here at 8, Rose added. "We can start the intake process for the program whenever you're ready." They left, and Owen was alone. Truly alone for the first time since Chan had chased him down on the street. The 4 continued its steady drip. The monitors beeped softly. Outside the window, the city was beginning to wake. Dawn was coming. Owen looked at the letter one more time. Then he carefully placed it on the bedside table. Tomorrow. He would read it tomorrow. Tonight, he would just rest. Would just breathe. Would just be. "Still here? Lizzie," he whispered into the quiet room. Still trying. And for the first time in 3 years, maybe actually believing it. Owen woke to sunlight streaming through the hospital window. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His hand moved instinctively to his side. Reaching for the knife, he kept within arm's reach when sleeping on the streets. But his fingers found only clean sheets and the tape securing his foreline. Hospital. Medical ward. Room 412. The memories returned slowly, assembling themselves into coherent narrative. Dr. Harlow's dismissal. Dr. Chin's pursuit. Webb's recognition. Rose's promise. The choice to stay. He sat up carefully, his arm throbbing but manageable. The infection was still there, still angry and hot to the touch, but the antibiotics were doing their work. His fever had broken some time in the night. His thoughts were clearer than they had been in days. The letter sat on the bedside table where he had left it. Elizabeth's handwriting seemed to glow in the morning light. Owen reached for it, his fingers trembling. 3 years. He had carried her loss for 3 years without ever reading her final words to him, without knowing what she wanted him to hear. He broke the seal carefully, unfolded the pages inside. Elizabeth's voice spoke to him from beyond death, from the moment when she had known she was dying and had tried one last time to save the man she loved. "My dearest Owen," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means Rosa found you. It means you're alive, even if you don't particularly want to be. I know you, my love. I know that when I'm gone, you're going to blame yourself. You're going to think that all your training, all your experience, all your skill should have been enough to save me. And when it isn't, you're going to punish yourself for that failure. So I'm writing this to tell you something you need to hear. You didn't fail me. Not once in 30 years. Not for a single moment. You gave me a life so full of love and joy and purpose that I consider myself the luckiest woman who ever lived. And my death isn't your failure. It's just the way life works sometimes. Cells betray us. Bodies break down. Medicine can't fix everything, no matter how skilled the hands that practice it. Owen's vision blurred. He wiped his eyes with his free hand and continued reading. I know you're going to run. I know you're going to convince yourself you don't deserve help or healing or happiness. That's why I contacted Rosa. That's why I made her promise to find you, to bring you back, to give you the support you're too stubborn to ask for yourself. Because you deserve all of those things, Owen. You deserve them not because of what you did in Mogadishu, not because of the lives you saved or the medals you earned. You deserve them because you're human, because you're my husband, because I love you with everything I am. I need you to do something for me. I need you to forgive yourself. I need you to accept that loving me was enough, that being with me through the good years and the terrible ending was enough, that you gave me everything I could have possibly wanted from this life. And I need you to live, really live, not just survive, not just exist, but find joy again, find purpose, help people the way you always have, be the man I fell in love with, the man who runs toward danger instead of away from it, the man who believes that every life is worth saving, including yours. There's a box in our attic. Do you remember the one I mean? The blue plastic storage container in the far corner. Inside are letters from soldiers you treated, families you helped, people whose lives you saved or changed or made better just by being you. I collected them over the years. Every thank you card, every email, every letter that found its way to our door. There are hundreds of them, Owen. Hundreds of people who are alive because of you, who have families because you brought them home, who have futures because you refuse to give up on them. When you're ready, when you're strong enough, I want you to read those letters. I want you to see yourself the way I see you, the way all those people see you, not as a failure, not as someone who couldn't save everyone, but as a hero who saved so many. As a man who made the world better just by being in it. I love you, Owen Kavanaugh. I loved you the day I met you. I loved you through every deployment, every nightmare, every moment you came home carrying weights you couldn't share. I loved you through my illness, even when you thought you were failing me. I will love you beyond death. And wherever I am now, whatever comes next, I am so incredibly proud to have been your wife. Live, my darling. Live for both of us. Live because that's what I want. What I've always wanted. Your happiness. Your healing. Your future. All my love. Always and forever, Elizabeth. Owen's hand shook so hard the paper rattled. Sobs tore from his chest, raw and painful and 3 years overdue. He doubled over, clutching the letter to his chest, and let himself break. Let himself grieve. Let himself feel every moment of loss and love and longing he had been holding inside since the day she died. He cried for Elizabeth, for the life they should have had together, for the grandchildren they would never meet, for the quiet mornings and shared laughter and simple, ordinary moments that cancer had stolen from them both. But he also cried for himself, for the 3 years he had wasted, for the pain he had inflicted on himself in the name of penance, for the help he had refused because he believed he didn't deserve it, for all the moments when he could have reached out and chosen instead to disappear. The door opened quietly. Owen looked up to find Webb standing in the doorway, Rosa beside him. They took in his tears, the letter clutched in his hands, the raw grief written across his face. Neither of them looked away. Neither of them offered empty platitudes or false comfort. Rosa moved first, crossing the room to sit on the edge of Owen's bed. She took his hand, the one not holding Elizabeth's letter, and squeezed gently. She knew, Rosa said softly. She knew exactly what you'd need to hear. That's why she wrote it. Webb stepped closer. I've never lost a spouse, he said, but I've lost brothers. Men I served with. Men I operated on and couldn't save. And I know that guilt. I know how it eats at you. Makes you think you should have been faster, smarter, better. But Elizabeth was right. You didn't fail her. You loved her. That's what matters. Owen wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. How do I do this? He whispered. How do I move forward when part of me is still back there, watching her die? You do it one day at a time, Rosa answered. You do it by accepting help when it's offered, by reading those letters Elizabeth told you about, by remembering that healing isn't betrayal, that living isn't forgetting, that you can honor her memory by being the man she believed you were. The door opened again, and Chin appeared. She was still in scrubs from her overnight shift, exhaustion evident in her face. But her eyes were bright, determined. I wanted to check on you before I went home, she said. See how you're doing. Owen looked at the 3 people standing in his hospital room. 3 people who had no reason to care about a homeless veteran who had given up on himself. 3 people who cared anyway, who fought for him, who refused to let him disappear. And beyond them, beyond this room, there were hundreds more. Soldiers whose names were written in letters stored in an attic. Families who had gotten their loved ones back because Owen had refused to give up. A wife who had loved him enough to reach beyond death to save him one more time. Maybe Webb was right. Maybe this was like Mogadishu. Not the combat, not the chaos, but the choice. The decision to run toward the wounded instead of away. To fight for life even when the odds seemed impossible. To believe that every person, including himself, was worth saving. I want to read them, Owen said quietly. The letters Elizabeth mentioned. Can someone help me get them? Rosa's mind. I already have them. Elizabeth gave me a key to your house before she died. I picked up the box last week, just in case. It's in my car. Then yes, Owen said. Yes, I want to read them. All of them. I want to remember who I was. Who I could be again. Webb nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. That's the first step. The hardest one. Everything else gets easier from here. Owen wasn't sure he believed that. Wasn't sure anything about healing could be easy. But for the first time in 3 years, he was willing to try. Willing to hope. Willing to honor Elizabeth's faith in him by giving himself a chance. Still here, Lizzie, he whispered, looking down at her letter. Still trying. And this time, I'm not giving up. Rosa returned an hour later with a box. Blue plastic, exactly as Elizabeth had described. Worn at the edges from years of storage. She sat on the rolling table beside Owen's bed and stepped back, giving him space. Owen stared at it for a long moment. Inside that box were pieces of a life he had walked away from. Proof that he had mattered to people. That his work had meant something. He wasn't sure he was ready to face that. Wasn't sure he could handle the weight of all those lives pressing down on him again. But Elizabeth had wanted him to read them. Had collected them specifically for this moment. Had known that someday he would need to remember. He reached out and lifted the lid. The box was full. Letters, cards, photographs, emails printed on paper. Hundreds of them, just as Elizabeth had said. Some in official military stationery. Some on lined notebook paper. Some in children's handwriting, drawings accompanying words. Owen picked up the first one his fingers touched. Sergeant Kavanaugh, it began. You don't know me, but you saved my husband's life in Fallujah in 2004. Lance Corporal James Morrison. He took shrapnel to his chest and leg. The doctors at Landstuhl said if you hadn't stabilized him in the field, if you hadn't kept him alive for those critical first hours, he never would have made it to surgery. Because of you, James came home. Because of you, we had 3 more beautiful years together before cancer took him in 2007. But those 3 years meant everything. We had time to say goodbye. Time to tell our daughters about their daddy. Time to make peace. Thank you for giving us that gift. Thank you for bringing him home. Owen's breath caught. He remembered James Morrison. Remembered the shrapnel wounds, the collapsed lung, the desperate fight to keep him stable during the convoy to the field hospital. He had been so focused on the immediate crisis that he hadn't thought about what came after. About the wife waiting. About the daughters who needed their father. He reached for another letter. Dear Sergeant Kavanaugh, this one read, My name is Danny Reeves. You probably don't remember me, but I will never forget you. October 3rd, 1993. Mogadishu. Super 6-1 crash site. I was 19 years old and bleeding out from a severed femoral artery. You used forceps made from helicopter frame to clamp the bleeder. You kept pressure on that wound for 40 minutes while the world tried to kill us both. You told me I was going to make a home. You promised. And you kept that promise. I'm 50 now, married 26 years. 3 kids, 2 grandchildren. I coach Little League. I volunteer at the VA. I live every day knowing I shouldn't be here. But I am. Because of you. Because you refused to let me die. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. But thank you. For everything. Owen's hands trembled. Danny Reeves. The kid from Oklahoma. Alive. Living a full life. Grandchildren. The image of that terrified 19-year-old boy bleeding out in the wreckage shifted, transformed into a man with a family, with purpose, with a future Owen had helped make possible. He read another, and another, letters from soldiers he had treated, from their wives and children and parents, from people whose lives had been saved or changed or made possible because Owen had been there in their worst moment. Each letter was a window into a life continuing, a child growing up, a career pursued, a love found, moments of ordinary joy made extraordinary by the fact that they almost hadn't happened. Webb had returned and was sitting quietly in the chair by the window. Jeanette joined him, her shift finally over, but unwilling to leave. Rosa stood near the door, watching Owen's face as he read, all of them understanding that this was a sacred moment. A reckoning. There's more, Rosa said gently. At the bottom, Owen dug deeper into the box and found a separate envelope, thicker than the others. On the front, in Elizabeth's handwriting, were the words, "For the days when you forget." Inside were photographs. Owen and Elizabeth on their wedding day, both of them so young it made his heart ache. Elizabeth holding their nephew at his christening. The two of them on vacation in Maine, laughing at something the camera had just missed. Elizabeth in the hospice bed, thin and weak, but smiling at him with such love it took his breath away. And underneath the photographs was a single piece of paper. Elizabeth's handwriting again, but shaky, written near the end. Owen, you're reading this because you're struggling. Because the weight of what you couldn't do is drowning out the memory of everything you did do. So I'm going to remind you, you save hundreds of lives in combat. You help thousands more as a teacher and mentor. You loved me with a devotion that made every day feel like a gift. You were kind to strangers, patient with children, loyal to friends, generous with your knowledge. You made the world better. You made my world better. And on the days when you can't see that, when the darkness is too thick and the guilt too heavy, I need you to trust me. Trust that I saw you clearly, that I knew your heart, that I love the man you are, not the perfect man you think you should have been. You are enough, Owen. You have always been enough. I love you. Elizabeth. The paper slipped from Owen's fingers. He covered his face with his hands and wept again, but this time the tears felt different. Not just grief, not just pain, but something else. Something that might have been acceptance, might have been the beginning of forgiveness. Chun moved first, coming to stand beside the bed. She didn't touch him, didn't speak, just stood there as a presence, as a reminder that he wasn't alone. Webb joined her, then Rosa, 3 people who had fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself. The door opened abruptly. Dr. Harlow stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. He took in the scene before him. Owen surrounded by letters and photographs. The 3 people standing guard around his bed. The evidence of a life lived in service scattered across white hospital sheets. Harlow started, then stopped. His jaw worked as though he was chewing on words he didn't know how to swallow. I came to apologize. Owen looked up, wiping his eyes. The last person he had expected to see was the man who had dismissed him as worthless less than 12 hours ago. Harlow stepped into the room, his movements stiff and uncomfortable. The hospital administrator spoke with me, at length, about my conduct last night, about my assumptions, about how I treated you. She pulled your complete medical records, your military service file, your commendations. He paused, struggling. I saw what you did in Mogadishu, what you've done throughout your career, the protocols you developed that we still use in this emergency room every single day. And I realized that when I looked at you last night, I didn't see a person. I saw a problem. A category, a stereotype. I didn't see the human being standing in front of me. Harlow's voice was thick with something that might have been shame. I violated every principle I'm supposed to uphold as a physician. I judged based on appearance rather than need. I let my frustration with the system override my obligation to the patient. I was wrong, completely wrong, and I'm sorry. Owen studied the other man's face, saw genuine remorse there, genuine recognition of failure. It would have been easy to be angry, to reject the apology, to make Harlow feel the full weight of his mistake. But Owen had spent 3 years drowning in his own mistakes, his own failures, his own guilt. He understood what it meant to be crushed by the weight of what you couldn't undo. Apology accepted, Owen said quietly. We all make mistakes, doctor. The measure of a person is what they do after. Harlow blinked, clearly surprised. You're being more generous than I deserve. Maybe, Owen agreed. But I've spent 3 years punishing myself for things I couldn't control. For not being perfect. For not being able to save everyone. I'm learning that holding on to that kind of anger only destroys the person carrying it. So I'm letting it go, starting with forgiving you. And eventually, if I'm lucky, forgiving myself. Harlow nodded slowly. The administrator has asked me to take a leave of absence, to undergo training on implicit bias and patient dignity. I think, he added, his voice softer, that I need it, that I've lost sight of why I became a doctor in the first place. We all lose sight sometimes, Webb said from his position by the window. The important thing is finding your way back. Harlow looked at Owen one more time. Thank you, he said, for your service, for your sacrifice, and for showing me more grace than I showed you. He turned and left, the door closing quietly behind him. The room was silent for a moment. Then Rosa spoke. That was kind of you. Owen shook his head. It wasn't kindness. It was survival. Elizabeth was right. Holding on to anger and guilt will kill you just as surely as any infection. I've been dying from it for 3 years. It's time to start healing instead. The infection began to respond to treatment by the second day. The angry red streaks climbing Owen's arm started to fade. His fever disappeared completely. The wound itself, while still tender, showed signs of healing. Chun checked on him 3 times during her shifts, monitoring his progress with the careful attention she gave to all her patients. But Owen could see something else in her eyes, too. Relief. Satisfaction that she had been right to bring him back. That the fight had been worth it. Webb visited every morning, sometimes just to sit and talk. They discussed medicine, trauma care, the ways the field had evolved since Mogadishu. But they also talked about loss, about grief, about the particular burden carried by those who spent their lives trying to save people. Webb's stories helped Owen understand he wasn't alone in his struggles. That survival guilt was a wound as real as any physical injury. And like physical wounds, it needed treatment to heal. Rosa came each afternoon with paperwork for the reintegration program. But she never pushed, never demanded signatures or commitments. Just laid out options, answered questions, and made it clear that the door would remain open whether Owen walked through it today or 6 months from now. Her patience was a gift Owen hadn't known he needed. On the 3rd morning, a visitor arrived that Owen hadn't expected. A young man in Marine Corps dress blues stood in the doorway, his cover tucked under his arm, his expression nervous but determined. He couldn't have been more than 25 years old. Sergeant Kavanaugh, the young Marine said, "My name is Corporal Tyler Morrison. I'm James Morrison's son." Owen sat up straighter in bed, his mind racing back to the letter he had read. Lance Corporal James Morrison. Fallujah, 2004. Shrapnel wounds. 3 more years with his family before cancer took him. Your father, Owen said quietly. I remember treating him. How is he? Tyler's expression shifted to something sad but peaceful. He passed away in 2007, sir. Cancer. But he had 3 years after Fallujah. 3 years to watch me and my sister grow up. 3 years to teach me how to be a man. To prepare us for losing him. My mom wrote you a letter back then, but I wanted to tell you in person. Those 3 years changed everything for our family. The young Marine stepped closer. Dad talked about you all the time. About how you stayed calm under fire. How you knew exactly what to do even when everything was chaos. He said you told him he was going to make it home, and he believed you because you said it like a promise. Like you wouldn't let anything else happen. Owen remembered that moment. The convoy under attack. James Morrison bleeding in the back of the Humvee. Owen working frantically to stabilize him while bullets pinged off the armor. And yes, he had made a promise. Because sometimes promises were the only thing that kept a wounded soldier fighting to stay alive. I joined the Marines because of him, Tyler continued. Because he taught me about service, about sacrifice, about being part of something bigger than yourself. I'm a combat medic now, sir. 18D qualified, just like you were. And everything I learned, everything I do, it's because you gave me the chance to have a father who could teach me those things. The young man's voice thickened with emotion. So I wanted to say thank you, not just for saving my dad's life, but for giving me mine, for making it possible for me to exist in the world and become who I am. You saved more than one life that day in Fallujah, sir. You saved all the lives that came after. Mine, my sisters, the soldiers I've treated, the families that got their loved ones back because I was there to help. It all traces back to you. Owen felt his throat close. He had never thought about it that way, never considered the ripple effects of the lives he saved. That James Morrison survival meant his children grew up with a father. That one of those children became a medic who saved other lives. That each person he treated created expanding circles of impact that touched hundreds, maybe thousands of people he would never meet. You don't need to thank me, Owen managed. Your father fought to survive. He did the hard part. With respect, sir, Tyler said. We both know that's not true. I've been deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. I've treated combat casualties. I know what it takes to keep someone alive in those conditions. The skill, the focus, the refusal to give up even when the odds are impossible. That's not something everyone can do. That's something special. Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He held it out to Owen. This was my dad's. He carried it through his whole deployment. After he died, my mom gave it to me, and now I want you to have it. Owen took the object, a challenge coin, Marine's insignia on one side. On the other, engraved words, James Morrison. Semper Fi. Thank you for bringing him home. I can't take this, Owen whispered. Yes, sir, you can. My dad would want you to have it. We want you to know that what you did mattered, that it's still mattering, that every day I put on this uniform, every time I treat a wounded Marine, I'm carrying forward what you started. Webb was standing in the doorway. Owen realized. Chim beside him. Rosa too. All of them witnessing this moment. This young Marine standing at attention, offering gratitude that spanned decades and generations. How did you find me? Owen asked. Dr. Webb, sir. He reached out to veterans networks, asking if anyone knew James Morrison's family. My mom called me, and I drove 6 hours to get here. Wouldn't have missed it for anything. Tyler straightened to attention and saluted. Sergeant Kavanaugh, it's an honor to meet you, sir, and an honor to follow in your footsteps. Owen's hand came up automatically, returning the salute even though he wasn't in uniform, even though it had been years since anyone had addressed him by rank. The gesture felt strange and familiar all at once, a connection to a life he thought he had left behind. Tyler lowered his hand and extended it for a handshake instead. Owen took it, feeling the firm grip, the calluses that came from hard work and harder training. This young man was everything Owen had been once. Everything he could be again, maybe not a combat medic anymore, but someone who still believed that lives were worth saving, that service mattered, that the fight wasn't over. Take care of your Marines, Owen said. Bring them home. Always, sir. That's the promise we make. Just like you did. Tyler left, and the room felt larger in his absence. Owen sat holding the challenge coin, running his thumb over the engraved words. Thank you for bringing him home. Such simple words, but they contained multitudes, contained a life continuing, a family intact, a legacy passed down. That's what we do, Webb said quietly from the doorway. We save one life, and that life goes on to touch hundreds more, thousands more. We can't always see the ripple effects, but they're there, every single time. Owen looked at the coin, then at the box of letters still sitting on the table. Hundreds of people whose lives he had saved, or changed, or made better. And each of those people had their own ripples, their own families, their own futures, their own impacts on the world. He had spent 3 years believing Elizabeth's death erased everything he had accomplished, that failing to save one life negated all the lives he had saved. But it didn't work that way. The soldiers he treated in Mogadishu still had children and grandchildren. The Marines from Fallujah still coached Little League and volunteered at the VA. The protocols he developed still saved lives every single day in emergency rooms and battlefield aid stations around the world. Elizabeth had been right. He was enough. He had always been enough. Not because he was perfect, not because he could save everyone, but because he had tried, because he had shown up, because he had made promises and kept them, because he had refused to give up on people even when giving up would have been easier. Chun stepped into the room. "Your infection markers are almost back to normal," she said. "Fever's gone. Wound is healing well. Medically, you're ready for discharge tomorrow." And after discharge, Rosa added, "If you're ready, the reintegration facility has a room waiting. Medical support, counseling, housing. Everything we discussed. It's yours if you want it." Owen looked at the three of them, the people who had fought for him, who had refused to let him disappear, who had shown him that accepting help wasn't weakness but wisdom, that healing was possible, that he could honor Elizabeth's memory not by destroying himself, but by living the life she wanted him to have. He looked down at the challenge coin one more time, at the proof that what he did mattered, that was still mattering, that somewhere in the world, a young Marine was treating wounded soldiers and bringing them home because Owen had brought his father home first. "Yes," Owen said firmly. "I'm ready. Let's begin." The reintegration facility was nothing like Owen expected. He had imagined something institutional, sterile, a place that felt like waiting to die rather than learning to live. But the building Rosa brought him to was different. A converted apartment complex with private rooms, communal spaces that felt warm rather than clinical, and staff who treated residents as people rather than problems to be managed. "Your room is on the second floor," Rosa said as they climbed the stairs. Owen's discharge paperwork was folded in his pocket, his infection finally under control. "Number 217. You've got a bed, desk, bathroom, kitchen privileges downstairs. Medical clinic on site with a nurse practitioner and visiting physicians. Counselor available whenever you need to talk." She unlocked the door and stepped aside. Owen entered slowly, taking in the space. It was small but clean. A real bed with a thick mattress and clean linens. A window overlooking a small courtyard where other residents sat talking in the afternoon sun. A desk with a reading lamp. A bookshelf waiting to be filled. "It's yours for as long as you need it," Rosa said. "No time limit. No pressure. This is a place to heal, not a place to rush through healing." Owen set down the plastic bag containing his few possessions. The clothes Chun had arranged for him to have. The box of letters from Elizabeth. The challenge coin from Tyler Morrison. Everything he owned in the world fit in one small bag, but somehow it felt like more than he had carried in years. "There's a group meeting tonight at 7, Rosa continued. "Other veterans in the program. Nobody has to share if they don't want to. But sometimes it helps to be around people who understand. People who've been where you are." "I'll think about it," Owen said. Rosa smiled. "That's all I ask. Think about it. And remember, you're not alone here. We got 43 residents right now. Combat vets mostly. Different eras, different branches, but all of them trying to find their way back. You'll fit right in." She left him alone to settle in. Owen sat on the edge of the bed, testing the mattress. It was soft. Too soft after 3 years of concrete and cardboard. He knew it would take time to adjust. Time to feel safe sleeping in a locked room. Time to stop waking every 2 hours ready to run. But he had time now. That was the gift Rosa and Chun and Webb had given him. Time to heal. Time to remember who he had been before grief consumed him. Time to figure out who he could become after. He unpacked the box of letters and arranged them on the desk. Placed Elizabeth's final letter on top, where he could see it. Put the challenge coin beside it. These were his anchors now. Reminders that he had mattered. That he still mattered. That the work wasn't finished. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Owen opened it to find a man about his age standing in the hallway. He was lean, weathered, with a prosthetic leg visible below his shorts. His T-shirt identified him as Army 101st Airborne. "Hey," the man said. "I'm Markus Vep. No relation to the doctor, unfortunately. Heard we had a new resident. Thought I'd introduce myself. Owen Kavanaugh," Owen replied, shaking the offered hand. "Kavanaugh? Wait. Owen Kavanaugh, former Special Forces medic. Mogadishu, the legend himself." Owen blinked in surprise. "How do you know that?" Marcus grinned. "Rosa told us a decorated combat medic was joining the program. I did some asking around in Vetter Networks. Your name came up, along with about 50 stories about impossible saves and protocols that change combat medicine. You're kind of famous in certain circles, man." "That was a long time ago," Owen said uncomfortably. "Maybe, but the work you did still matters. Still saves lives. I lost my leg in Afghanistan in 2011. IED blast. The medic who treated me used techniques you developed. Tourniquet application, pressure points, the whole protocol. He told me later that without those protocols, I would have bled out before the medevac arrived. So I guess I owe you my life too." Owen didn't know what to say. The ripples kept expanding. Soldiers he had never met, saved by techniques he had developed decades ago. Lies continuing because he had refused to accept that dying was inevitable. "Listen," Marcus continued. "Tonight's group meeting. It's not therapy exactly. Just guys talking. Some of us have been here 6 months. Some 2 years. We share what's working, what's not. Nobody judges. Nobody pushes. But it helps, being around people who get it." "I'll be there," Owen heard himself say. Marcus smiled. "Good. 7 o'clock. Common room downstairs. Fair warning, Jenkins makes terrible coffee, but he's weirdly proud of it, so we all pretend it's great." He left, and Owen was alone again. But the room felt different now. Less like isolation and more like solitude. Less like an ending and more like a beginning. At 6:45, Owen made his way downstairs. The common room was larger than he expected, with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. A coffee station sat in the corner. And true to Marcus's warning, the coffee smelled burnt and bitter. Several men were already there, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 60s. They looked up as Owen entered, and a few nodded in greeting. Owen took a seat. More residents filtered in over the next few minutes. By 7, there were 14 people in the circle. Marcus stood and cleared his throat. "All right, everybody," he said. "We got a new face tonight. Owen, you want to introduce yourself?" Owen hesitated, then stood. "I'm Owen Kavanaugh, Army Special Forces, retired. I've been on the streets for 3 years. Lost my wife to cancer and didn't handle it well. Ended up in the ER a few days ago with an infection. Met some people who refused to let me give up. So here I am." "Here you are," Marcus echoed. "Welcome home, brother." "Welcome home," the group repeated in unison. The words hit Owen harder than he expected. Welcome home. Something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Something he hadn't believed he deserved. But these men, these veterans who had survived their own wars and losses and struggles, were offering it to him anyway. The meeting continued. Men shared updates on job searches, housing applications, struggles with nightmares, or anniversaries of loss. Nobody offered solutions. Nobody tried to fix anyone. They just listened, witnessed, and reminded each other that they weren't alone in the fight. When it was Owen's turn to share, he found himself talking about Elizabeth, about the guilt, about the 3 years spent punishing himself, about reading her letter and understanding that she had wanted him to live, not to waste away in grief. "My wife made me promise to find him." Rose's voice came from the doorway. Owen turned to see her standing there with Chun and Webb. She wanted him to know he wasn't alone. That help existed. That healing was possible. And I think she'd be proud of him for being here tonight. Webb stepped forward. "I've known a lot of combat medics in my career, but I've never met anyone who cared more about bringing people home than Owen did. And now it's our turn to bring him home. To remind him that he belongs. That his service mattered then and can matter again now." Chun moved to stand beside Owen's chair. "Why I chased you down that night outside the ER," she said. "I wasn't trying to save a decorated veteran. I was trying to save a human being who deserved care. But along the way, You saved me too. You reminded me why I became a doctor. Why fighting for patients matters. Why we never give up on people, no matter how hopeless things seem." Owen looked around the circle, at the veterans who understood his struggles because they had lived their own versions of them. At Rosa, who had kept a promise to a dying woman for 3 years. At Webb, who saw value in him when he couldn't see it himself. At Chun, who had run after him in the cold because she believed every life was worth saving. For 3 years, he had been running from this moment. From connection, from community, from the possibility that he could be worth something again. But he was done running, done hiding, done believing that surviving Elizabeth's death was a betrayal. "I don't know how to do this yet," Owen said quietly. "Don't know how to accept help, how to believe I deserve it. But I'm willing to try, willing to show up, willing to keep trying even when it's hard." "That's all any of us can do," Marcus said. "Show up. Try. Take it one day at a time. Some days will be good. Some will be terrible. But we're all here. We're all trying together. And that makes the difference." The meeting ended with handshakes and quiet words of encouragement. Owen stayed after, helping clean up coffee cups and straighten chairs. Simple tasks. Ordinary tasks. But they felt meaningful in a way nothing had felt meaningful in years. As he climbed the stairs back to his room, Owen pulled out his phone. Chin had helped him get a basic smartphone, taught him how to use it. He opened a notes app and typed a message to himself. Day 1. Still here. Still trying. And for the first time in 3 years, believing it might actually be enough. 6 months later, Owen stood at the front of a lecture hall in the county hospital, looking out at 30 emergency medicine residents. The room was the same one where he had once taught classes during his years at the VA. The same projection screen. The same uncomfortable chairs. But everything else was different. He was different. Today's topic is field trauma management under resource-limited conditions. Owen began. His voice was steady, confident. The voice of someone who had spent decades teaching young medics how to save lives. The protocols I'm going to show you were developed in combat zones where we didn't have the luxury of sterile operating rooms or advanced imaging. But the principles apply anywhere. Natural disasters, mass casualty events, rural areas with limited medical infrastructure. Anytime you have to do more with less. He clicked to the first slide, a diagram of hemorrhage control using improvised equipment. This technique was developed in Mogadishu in 1993. We had 17 casualties and limited medical supplies. I used forceps fashioned from helicopter frame to clamp a severed femoral artery. The soldier survived. The technique became standard protocol in combat medicine within 2 years. One of the residents raised her hand. "Dr. Kavanaugh, is it true you saved 47 lives in 18 hours during that operation?" Owen paused, considering. "I kept 47 men alive long enough to reach a field hospital where surgeons save their lives. I was one link in a long chain. That's the most important lesson in trauma care. You're never working alone. You're buying time for the next person in the chain. Your job is to keep the patient alive long enough for definitive care." He continued through the presentation, sharing techniques and stories, answering questions with the ease of someone who had lived this knowledge. Chin sat in the back row, observing. She had invited him to teach this class after mentioning to the residency director that one of the most decorated combat medics in Army history was living in the area. The director had jumped at the opportunity. When the class ended, residents clustered around Owen with follow-up questions. He answered each one patiently, drawing diagrams on scrap paper, explaining concepts multiple ways until understanding clicked. This was what he had been made for. Not just treating patients in the moment, but teaching others to save lives long after he was gone. Chin approached as the last resident left. "You're a natural at this," she said. "Have you thought about making it permanent? We could use someone with your experience teaching trauma protocols." Owen smiled. Rosa mentioned something similar. "The VA wants me to help with their combat medic training program, teaching young corpsmen and medics before they deploy." "You should do it," Chin said. "Both if you can. This is your gift, Owen. Not just saving lives directly, but multiplying your impact by teaching others." They walked together through the hospital corridors. Owen still felt a flutter of anxiety in these halls, remembering the night he had been dismissed and removed. But the memory had lost its power to wound him. It was just part of his story now. The valley he had walked through on his way to the other side. Webb was waiting in the cafeteria, 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee already on the table. Owen sat down across from him, accepting the coffee with a grateful nod. "How'd the class go?" Webb asked. "Good. Really good. The residents were engaged, asked smart questions. I forgot how much I missed teaching." Webb smiled. "Elizabeth will be proud. You honoring her memory by doing exactly what she wanted. Living, serving, making a difference." Owen pulled out his wallet and removed the worn photograph he kept there. Elizabeth in the hospice bed, smiling despite everything. He had looked at this photo every day for 6 months. At first, it had brought only pain, but gradually, the pain had softened into something gentler. Gratitude for the years they had. Acceptance that her death was not his failure. Love that persisted beyond loss. "I visited her grave this morning," Owen said. "Told her about the class, about the residents, about how I'm helping at the reintegration facility now, mentoring newer veterans. I think she'd like that." "I know she would," Webb replied. Rosa appeared, carrying a folder. "Owen, I need you to look at something." She sat down and opened the folder, revealing paperwork. "There's a young veteran who came into the program last week. Former Army medic. Afghanistan. He's struggling. Won't talk to the counselors, won't engage with the group. But he asked about you specifically. Said he'd heard your name, knew your reputation. I think he might open up if you reached out." Owen took the paperwork, scanning the details. 24 years old. Multiple deployments. Lost his best friend in a firefight where he couldn't stop the bleeding. The parallels to his own story were unmistakable. The guilt, the belief that he should have done more, been better, saved the unsavable. "I'll talk to him," Owen said. "Today if possible." Rosa handed him a room number. "He's expecting you." Owen found the young veteran in his room, staring out the window. The kid looked up as Owen knocked, and Owen saw his own reflection from 6 months ago. The hollow eyes, the defeated posture, the weight of carrying death when you were trained to prevent it. "I'm Owen Kavanaugh," Owen said. "Rosa said you want to talk." The young man nodded. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir. I heard you were the best, that you saved everyone in Mogadishu. I thought maybe you could tell me how you did it, because I couldn't save my best friend. I tried everything I knew, and it wasn't enough." Owen sat down in the chair by the window. "The best medics in the world can't save everyone. I couldn't save everyone in Mogadishu. I lost people too, and years later, I couldn't save my wife when cancer took her. Those losses almost destroyed me. I spent 3 years on the streets, punishing myself for not being perfect." The young man looked up, surprise evident. You were homeless." Owen nodded. "Lost my wife, couldn't forgive myself, walked away from everything. It took some stubborn people refusing to give up on me to pull me back. A doctor who chased me down in the cold. A surgeon who remembered me from 30 years ago. A VA liaison who kept a promise to my dying wife. They reminded me that failing to save one person doesn't erase all the people you did save." He leaned forward. "Your friend's death isn't your failure. It's a tragedy. War is full of them. But you being here, learning to live with that loss, that honors your friend's memory more than destroying yourself ever could. You want to make his death mean something. Then survive. Heal. Go on to save other lives. Teach other medics. Live the life he didn't get to live." The young man's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can." "You can. I know you can. Because I did. And if I can come back from 3 years of giving up, you can come back from this. You just have to take it one day at a time. Show up. Try. Accept help once offered. That's all any of us can do." They talked for another hour. Owen shared his story, his struggles, his slow climb back toward believing he was worth saving. The young veteran listened, asked questions, and by the end, some of the hollowness had left his eyes. Not cured, not healed, but beginning. And beginning was enough. That evening, Owen returned to his room at the reintegration facility. 6 months ago, this room had felt temporary, like a way station between homelessness and whatever came next. But now it felt like home, a place where he belonged, where he was rebuilding a life worth living. He opened his laptop, a recent purchase that still felt foreign in his hands. Chen had taught him how to email, and he had been slowly reconnecting with people from his past. Former soldiers he had served with. Families of men he had saved. The connections felt fragile, but precious. There was a new email waiting. The subject line read, "Thank you from the Morrison family." Owen opened it to find a photograph. Tyler Morrison in his marine dress blues, standing next to an elderly woman. Tyler's mother. James Morrison's widow. The email was brief, but powerful. "Dr. Kavanaugh, I finally got to meet Tyler's mother in person. I told her about meeting you, about the challenge coin. She wanted you to know that James talked about you until the day he died. That you were the reason she got 3 more years with her husband. The reason her children got to know their father. The reason Tyler is alive to serve as a medic today. She says to tell you that you save her whole family. Not just James. All of them. Thank you for everything. Semper Fi, Corporal Tyler Morrison." Owen read the email 3 times. Then he stood and walked to his window, looking out over the courtyard where veterans gathered in the evening sun. Marcus was down there, laughing at something someone said. Other residents sat on benches, talking quietly, supporting each other through another day of healing. This was his legacy now, not just the lives he had saved in combat, but the lives he was saving now by showing up, by teaching, by being proof that recovery was possible, that you could fall all the way down and still climb back up, that accepting help wasn't weakness, but the beginning of strength. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes. 6 months of daily entries. 6 months of showing up. 6 months of trying. He typed today's message. Day 183. Teaching again. Helping again. Living again. Elizabeth, I'm keeping my promise. I'm honoring your memory by refusing to waste the life you loved. Still here. Still trying. And finally believing I'm worth the effort. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. I love you. Always. Owen sent the message to himself, a ritual that had become his anchor. Then he grabbed his jacket and headed downstairs. The group meeting would start soon, and there would be new faces there. Veterans who needed to hear that recovery was possible, that they weren't alone, that someone understood, and Owen would be there to tell them. Not as a decorated hero, not as a legend from Mogadishu, but as a man who had lost everything and found his way back. As proof that the story didn't have to end in the darkness, that there was light on the other side if you were willing to keep walking toward it. He stepped out into the evening air, the sun warm on his face, and walked toward the common room where his brothers were waiting, where healing happened one day at a time, where lives were saved not through dramatic interventions, but through showing up, trying, and refusing to let each other disappear. Still here, he thought, still trying, and finally home.